a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be, if we met at midnight, in the hanging tree.
And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. If you find that morning cup of coffee just doesn't taste that good, or you need more zip in your life, try Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson is home to the best coffee in the universe. If you can't get there from there, try organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Still the best without having to leave the house. Good news. Trailer Trash Terrors is back. Annabelle Lee was contemplating moving over to my show, but Vic has started broadcasting again. I'll have to somehow survive without a creepy little girl looking over my shoulder. As Christopher Walken said in Sleepy Hollow, I wound up talking about Fort McIntosh a lot this week, and so I figured I would do a show about the place. When people ask me what is the not most haunted, but one of the better haunted locations in Laredo, Fort McIntosh will come up. It has more than its share of spirit activity. Laredo, or Villa de San Agustin de Laredo, as it was first named, was founded in 1755 and was located on the Rio Grande River near a low water crossing. El Paseo de Jacinto was used to cross the river as long as the weather was good and there was no rain to the north, which would raise the river to a dangerous level. Tomas Sanchez de la Barrera had been a captain in the Spanish army and was sent by the King of Spain to build a settlement that would support the crossing. A small village was named after Laredo, Cantabria, Spain, which is located on the coast of northern Spain in the area known as the Basque Country. With the signing of the Treaty of Cordoba, putting the B in the wrong location. With the signing of the Treaty of Cordoba, August 24th, 1821, Mexico gained their independence from Spain. Antonio de Padilla Maria Servino Lopez de Santa Ana y Perez de Lebrun, better known simply as Santa Anna, had begun his career as an infantry officer in the Spanish army. When it looked as if Mexico might just win, Santa Anna switched his allegiances and joined the rebellion. Mexico named the northern part of Mexico the state of Coahuila y Tejas. Santa Anna was elected president of Mexico April 1st, 1833. In 35, Santa Anna repealed the Mexican Constitution, which ultimately led to the beginning of the Texas Revolution. 1836, Texas became its own republic, claiming land from the Red River to the Rio Grande. Mexico decided the border was the Nueces River, since they called the Rio Grande the Rio Bravo. To Mexico, the Rio Grande was the Nueces River. This led to a huge area of land that was disputed by both countries. 1838, Texas President Marabou B. Lamar raised a force of 56 Rangers to run the Mexican military out of the southern portion of Texas and fight the Cherokee and the Comanche raiding parties that were preying on many small settlements. Santa Anna had decided he wanted to reclaim the land lost to Texas. He began making what looked like preparations to invade the country to the north. President Lamar thought it would be a good idea to have a country between them and Mexico. So convinced people living in northern Mexico to secede from their home country as well. Coahuila, Nuevo Leon, and Tamaulipas all joined together to form the Republic of the Rio Grande. The Republic's capital was placed in Laredo to put it as far from Mexico as possible. This new country only lasted from January 17th to November 6th of 1840. A lot of brave men were sacrificed trying to create it. The Republic of Texas was strapped for cash. They had no way of raising money to pay for all the things needed, like keeping the citizens safe. The folks living on the Rio Grande, as well as the western part of the country, were being plagued by bandits raiding from Mexico, as well as hostile Indian attacks. The idea was being discussed among the citizens that it would be beneficial for the Republic to become a state. December 29, 1845, Congress admitted Texas to the U.S. as a constituent state of the Union. Mexico still considered the land north of the Nueces River to belong to them. Did I say north? South. South of the Nueces River. The United States considered this land to be part of Texas, and therefore it was part of the United States. This led to the Mexican-American War that began in 1846. Santa Anna, who had been exiled from Mexico for his bad behavior, sent a letter to Mexico City saying that he would like to return to Mexico to lead their army in battling those nasty, horrible Texans as well as the United States. In 1846, after the Battle of Monterey, Texas Governor Henderson wanted troops to be sent to Laredo to protect this isolated town. However, General Taylor didn't think this was a good idea since Laredo had no military value as far as he was concerned. Marabou Bonaparte Lamar. How come we don't have kids with names like that anymore? Instead, they have unpronounceable names that are just made up. Marabou Bonaparte Lamar, former president of the Republic of Texas, serving as inspector general, resigned his position and was commissioned as a captain of the volunteers. 80 Texas Rangers re-enlisted as United States troops under Lamar. This unit was sent to defend Laredo against a Mexican invasion. The troops were also used to track down bandits and stop Indian raids on the ranches in the area. There was no military post in Laredo, so the troops were housed in and around the main plaza. The population at the time was about 1,900 people, which included West Laredo, which was on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande. Lamar let the alcalde, which was a magistrate or a mayor, take care of most of the legal concerns for the city. Both sides of the river continued to act like one city. When it was time for elections, folks from both sides of the river would run for office and vote for all the positions. Only 40 men showed up to vote on election day, of whom 37 of them were from Mexico. Laredo was sitting in two countries, but it was running as if it was just one place. September 1847, Lamar ordered the two towns to form separate governments, and only United States citizens could vote on the east side of the river. After this, the town on the west side of the river was known as Laredo de Monterrey. We should still call it that. The troops in Laredo were upset at not seeing any of the action of the war. It didn't help any when pay was late or non existent. The troops found it impossible to do what they weren't being paid for, since they didn't have very many horses. Most of the animals were being sent to the soldiers doing the actual fighting, and this led to even more morale problems. People living in Laredo felt as if the United States didn't care for their well being. They wrote a community letter requesting that the entire town be turned over to Mexico. The vast majority of the countries of the world all expected Mexico to win the war. The Mexican army was larger and it had experience since they had fought in many conflicts and they had the homeland advantage. What most people weren't considering was a vast majority of the Mexican troops were conscripts who felt they only owed allegiance to their hometowns and not the government in Mexico City. This led to many soldiers slipping away in the night just before a big battle. The U.S. troops were just outside Mexico City preparing to attack when the Mexican politicians decided it might be a good idea to try negotiating with Washington. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1848, placed the border between the United States and Mexico as being the Rio Grande River. People living on the east side didn't want the United States citizens moved that didn't want to be United States citizens moved to the other side of the river. Their land was then doled out to the folks still on the east side. A lot of people are still upset about that even today. March 3rd, 1849, Camp Crawford was established under the command of Lieutenant Viel. The camp consisted of a bunch of tents on the riverbank. The area around Laredo was lacking in any kind of large trees to be used for wood. Not having any buildings or supplies, the soldiers did their cooking and most of their working in the open. The conditions were described as being bad, very bad. In the summertime, the temperatures would get up to 110 degrees. There was no place to get any real shade. The few trees were small and sunlight just blazed right through their meager foliage. At night time, the temperatures would still be in the 90s. It's kind of hard to sleep when you're laying in a puddle of your own sweat. Laredo only has two real seasons, a summertime and winter, which lasts a couple of weeks. A cold wind comes from the north would plow through the tents and make life miserable. The troops all considered Camp Crawford to be the worst post in the army. 1850, Camp Crawford was renamed Fort McIntosh for Colonel James McIntosh, who died during the Mexican American War. Even though it was called a fort, there were no walls, only tents and a few breastworks. A breastwork is just a low temporary fighting position. In 1853, work actually began on a fort. It was shaped like a pentagon with three bastions. Those are the little things that stick out on the sides. Only one bastion was painted, pointed towards the river. This backed up onto a cliff. The ground was considered sufficient to stop any attacks coming from that direction. Two bastions were facing east, away from the river. The fort was still called a star fort, which referred to any fort that had bastions. Wood was scarce, so the fort was constructed using dirt that was piled up to form the walls. Two cannons were placed on platforms on the two east bastions. The fort was more for show since nobody ever even bothered to attack the place, at least not until World War I. The only structure was a stone magazine built underground so that the enemy fire wouldn't detonate their gunpowder. There were no buildings. The troops used tents or they lived outside. The few horses that were assigned to Fort McIntosh were kept in corrals built by piling up brush to create a barrier. During windstorms, the dirt piled up forming the walls would blow away, causing a sandstorm for anybody caught in it. The next morning, they had to go get more dirt and pile it back up. As more troops arrived at the fort, it was decided to build some barracks and a command office. There were nearly 500 men in 1856. Fort McIntosh was looking more like a military establishment than just a camp. The wood needed for construction had to be shipped in from the east. This added an extra expense to the growth of the fort. 1855, Florida was embroiled in the Third Seminole War. Army scouts and settlers were encroaching on land that belonged to the Seminole Indians. All those treaties, not worth the paper they were written on. The Indians had had enough and began attacking the forts and the settlements. The United States government began sending troops into Florida to deal with the situation, and many of those troops were taken out of Fort McIntosh. By 1858, there were only 26 men still in Laredo. With so few men at the fort, the government began selling the buildings to the local citizens, since wood was a valuable resource. Citizens would bid on a structure and then pay the quartermaster. Once the building belonged to the civilians, it had to be taken down and removed from the fort and then put back up. The wood was transported to wherever the owner wanted it. By 1865, Fort McIntosh was back to being a bunch of tents with dirt walls. Bandit activity and Indian raids began to increase. Some of the Indians were now living across from Eagle Pass. These were actually Seminoles who had left Florida because of the war there. The locals believed Chief Wildcat had somewhere around 800 men in his command. In actuality, there were about 300 Indians living in the area. Most of these were from the Kickapoo tribe, who had nothing to do with what was going on in Florida. Pressure from the locals led to an increase in the number of troops stationed along the border. By 1880, men began arriving at Fort McIntosh once again. Tents were erected all around the fort until buildings could once more be constructed. You see, it's not just today. The government has always had issues doing anything. As Fort McIntosh was once more beginning to look like a military establishment, the Civil War came along. There's a whole lot more history involved in Fort McIntosh, but I think y'all want to hear the ghost stories more than history. Laredo College had agreed to allow the Laredo Paranormal Research Society conduct a combination ghost tour and investigation. There were only going to be a couple of these, but things happened. The next thing we knew, we were having 2 or 3 nights every week with 5, 6, 7 tours every time. Laredo College was overrun with enthusiasts wanting to have some form of paranormal activity. October 5th, 2018, investigators and guests all met at the Fort Chapel, which was named in honor of Private David B. Barclay Cantu, who was born March 31st, 1899. He died in combat November 9th, 1918, 2 days before the armistice. Private Berkeley was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his heroic action in France. The first night of the Laredo College investigation started off kind of slow. The LPRS had already sent out the first group at the chapel. Al was leading the second group of about 5 people. He was accompanied by Joe Rogelio, another LPRS investigator. The tour following right after the other group that had just started investigating a few minutes ahead of them. The idea was to teach the folks participating in the tour how to conduct a ghost investigation. Al and Joe instructed their group on how to perform an EVP session. The group were told to take lots of photos so they might just catch something paranormal. Al took his tour up to the second floor for further investigation. The chapel is kind of an unusual design. It's 2 stories in the front, but it's only 1 story in the back, but you have to take the stairs up and down either way. Split level church, if you will. There were already people lining the sidewalks out front, and Al led his people back downstairs. He noticed the office was now empty, so he asked if the group wanted to give it a try in there. One of the ladies that was in the group told Al she didn't feel comfortable in that office. She said it felt like there was something in there. The rest of the team moved into the office when one of the young men let out a yell of pain. Al moved over to see what was going on, and he asked what had happened. The young man stated he felt something on his back. The man then said he felt as if he'd been scratched by something. Al asked the young man's girlfriend to lift his shirt. There were 6 scratches running up and down on the man's back. Due to the cramped quarters, Joe had stayed outside in the hallway, looking in. The man with the scratches was escorted back to the main room to see if he needed any first aid. Al continued the investigation to see if whatever had attacked this guy was still there and might respond. Just because something scratches you during an investigation doesn't mean it's a bad entity. Sometimes that's all that the spirit is capable of doing. They're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to get your attention, but it's one of those things. It's kind of like when a cat starts howling or biting or scratching, and really it's just trying to get your attention. In the main room, Ishmael, Manny, and Joe had looked to see what needed for the man with the scratches. He had 6 vertical lines running up and down his lower back. Several investigators went down to the office and they looked for anything that the man might have bumped up into, rubbed up against that could have produced these marks, but there was nothing there. Plus, since the scratches were up and down, they were about a foot long, he would have had to have really worked at getting injured. During an investigation, there are hundreds of photographs taken. With digital cameras, you can take as many pictures as your memory card will hold. One image shows the front door at the bottom of the stairs. If you look closely at the photo, you can see a woman standing to the side of the frame. Look close, and you can see the door right through her body. Back in 1990, my neighbor Eddie was at the Laredo Junior College, which later became the Laredo Community College and now is simply known as the Laredo College. Changed names too darn often. To me, it's still LJC. I found this the other day while digging around in my desk. It's an LJC ID from back in 1990. For those of you not watching on YouTube, that was my student ID from way back when I was taking classes there to try to make myself a little more educated. Uh, the photos at the front, getting back to Eddie, sorry. Laredo Junior College, they were there playing basketball. The game was over and everybody was packing up to leave. Eddie was talking to the coach about things other than basketball. An old couple began walking across the court. They were dressed in clothes that looked a bit old fashioned, but old folks sometimes wear old clothes. The coach looked at the pair and he asked if he could help them since the building was not open to the public at the time. The couple did not acknowledge him. Eddie and the coach both looked at the couple as they wandered across the floor. They approached the wall without slowing down. Then, as they watched, the couple walked right through the wall and vanished. What could you say other than, let's get the heck out of here? The Army brings people together from all over the United States with the purpose of training them to destroy the enemy. This is not a place for singing and hiking. All those rifles and cannons are there not for decorations. You train to fight. It can be a very violent atmosphere. When you have large groups of men all stuck in one location for long periods of time, it can bring out the worst in some of them. Long periods of inactivity are common, and this can lead to discipline problems. Weekends didn't always mean you got leave. 1 or 2 days each month to head to town was considered sufficient. On these occasions, the men would try to make up for lost time, drinking and misbehaving. In any city in the United States, if a person violates the law, they wind up in jail. On a military post, you wind up in the guardhouse. This would be a combination office space and a lockup. According to a map I ran across, Fort McIntosh had several guardhouses. The only one still standing today was built in 1886. The structure consists of 4 large rooms and 3 tiny detention cells. 2 of the large rooms were cells, but they were like common areas. Lots of prisoners with bunks. The smaller cells were reserved for the problem children. All the doors and windows are covered by bars, making it look very intimidating. The 3 small cells had windows that were placed high up on the wall, so a prisoner could see if it was daytime or not. And that was about it. They couldn't even stand up and look out the window. It was just too high off the floor. The door to these small cells were solid wood. On a hot day, there was no way to get a breeze coming in to one of these cells, and after a few days of winter, they would be icy cold. The only way of relieving themselves would have been a bucket provided to the prisoners that was emptied once a day. October 20th, 2018, the LPRS set up their ghost hunting equipment in the guardhouse. The students and staff who had signed up for the tour arrived and they were issued cameras and recorders so they could participate in the ghost investigation. Each group was sent through the building along with one or two LPRS members to keep an eye on things so that nobody got hurt. The people on the tours would be doing most of the investigating. We were just there to help out and give advice. A young girl named Sophie, her mom worked at the college, showed up every night for every tour. You could say she was really in to ghost hunting. She was the first one through the door of the guardhouse for that first investigation. About 10 students ranging in age from 18 to 25 filed in behind her. It was too crowded in the room, so I stayed outside on the porch and just kind of stuck my head in through the door. The rooms are all connected by passageways with barred doors, but these were all still locked. You could look from room to room, but you couldn't walk through. To move from one room to the next, it was necessary to go outside, walk across the porch, and then enter the next room. At one time, the guardhouse had been used as a children's museum. Then the building was used for storage. There were a collection of antique bottles all sitting on the floor. In the center room, somebody knocked over one of the bottles, which made a loud bang. This was followed by a scream and a sudden exodus from the guardhouse. All the students had run as if being chased by a ghost. I looked in to see if anybody was still in there. There was Sophie holding out an EMF detector, trying to see if she could capture evidence of a ghost. The students, the older ones, had all run off and left her behind. She was so intent on doing what she was there for, she hardly even noticed she was now alone. The students all looked back and forth, realizing that they had been spooked by nothing, and they slowly trickled back inside. I wonder what they thought when they saw Sophie was the only one who didn't scream and run. Later that same night, Ishmael set up the Mel meter in the central room. The Mel 8704 was designed and built by a Gary Galka. His eldest daughter, Melissa, was born in 1987 and she died in 2004. This is why the number is 8704. After her death, she began making contact with her family, so Gary put this meter together to make communications easier. The meter is a dual-purpose unit that measures both EMF and temperature changes simultaneously. The students all gathered around to watch and listen as Ishmael asked for any spirits to make presence known. Being a jail, Ishmael asked if any of the spirits had been prisoners here. He asked in both English and Spanish. June 16th, 1916, a band of 100 Mexican soldiers from either the Carrancistas or the seditionistas decided to attack a small military post in San Ignacio, Texas. What they didn't know was a large detachment of soldiers was moving from Fort McIntosh en route to Fort Ringgold, and they had stopped in San Ignacio for the night. As the Mexican soldiers crossed the river, they were met by a superior force, and during the skirmish, many men were killed. 3 American soldiers and 6 Mexican soldiers were dead, and several were laying wounded. As daylight came over the small town, the United States soldiers had managed to capture several of their attackers. The prisoners were transported back to Fort McIntosh. Once at the fort, Texas Rangers were called to the fort, and from there they transported the prisoners to the Webb County Jail. One of the wounded soldiers from Fort McIntosh died the next day from his injuries, and the district attorney used this as a reason to try the Mexican soldiers in Webb County, even though the raid had been in Zapata County. The invaders were found guilty of murder. As they awaited execution, an appeals court stepped in and declared the prisoners could not be tried in the state court because Texas was at war with Mexico, even though nobody knew it at the time. Therefore, the prisoners had to face a military court. The entire company that had been faced forced the entire company that had faced the invaders had been reassigned to Fort Bliss in El Paso, and there were no witnesses around to state the case. The Texas Rangers turned the prisoners over to Colonel Ferguson at Fort McIntosh. After a few weeks of debate, the military said the United States is not at war with Mexico, and this meant that Texas is not at war with Mexico. The prisoners were then released into Nuevo Laredo, where they received a hero's welcome. So Ishmael asking the spirits in Spanish was appropriate. The meter would give off a high-pitched sound after each question. The questions were all yes or no answers, and the spirit was asked to make one sound for yes and two for no. While Ishmael was asking questions and watching the EMF detector, the device suddenly fell off the wooden box that it was sitting on. Nobody had been close enough to knock it over, and nobody was within, I would say, 2 feet of the box. One of the students in the tour had been filming the whole time, but he didn't catch the moment that the EMF fell over. It was just one of those times where he brought the camera up just a couple inches and bam, the thing fell on the floor. Chiga Hall is the oldest building still standing at the Laredo College. It was built in 1880. It was one of 3 buildings used for troops. Each building was a 2-story brick structure with a basement used for storage and a large attic. As the buildings grew old, the newer, more modern construction methods came along. The barracks were slowly torn down to allow for newer buildings to be put up. The sole remaining building was named for Domingo Archiga, who was the president of the Laredo Junior College 1974. The staff working in the old building began telling of strange sightings and sounds as they worked in their offices or they moved about the building. Ishmael managed to get permission from the Laredo Paranormal Research Society to conduct combined ghost tours and investigations inside the hall. The gang arrived early to set up all the equipment. Cameras, recorders were there to be used by the staff and the students wishing to learn and to participate in a ghost investigation. After a briefing on how to use the equipment and the proper procedures in conducting an investigation, the participants were sent up to begin their ghost hunts in the attic, where it was about 100 degrees, even though it was nighttime. It was warm outside and hot in the attic. The students and the staff would rotate every hour. The LPRS investigators would spend nearly 4 hours in the cramped, stifling space. The combined with climbing the stairs led to an aerobic workout. Everyone was glad to get back downstairs and into the air conditioning. If you were lucky, you could stand in the stairwell and catch a slight cool breeze. That's where I was most of the time. One suspected reason for the ghostly presence is what happened back in 1986. Two women working at the hall died in a car crash during their lunch break. The fire alarm had gone off during work hours. Everyone was ushered outside as the fire department arrived to investigate. With everybody standing around outside, it was decided to take an early lunch break. As the two women were returning to the college, a car ran a stoplight and hit them. They both died instantly. It sounds as if they may have returned to work anyway. Using an EMF detector, the team had asked how old one of the spirits was. It said it was 8. Dana had brought some candy along with her and would offer it to the spirit. The EMF detector would flash once for yes, twice for no. She asked if the spirit wanted her to give candy to one of the students in the group. It flashed no. She asked if the spirit wanted all the candy for herself, and it said yes. This activity continued until Dana had run out of treats. When it was time to leave, all the candy was left sitting on the desk. Hey, if you give something to a spirit, you better not take it back. They'll follow you home. As each tour was ending, Ishmael would have all the guests stand together for a photo. This was to go into the LPRS archives. Each night there would be 4 or 5 tours, sometimes 6 or 7, depending on the number of folks who had shown up. Once everybody was home, the photos are looked over to see how they came out and if there was anything that needed looking into further. Standing behind the group from Arechiga Hall, there was an extra guest spotted. Based on the angle of the photo and the distance, the shape looks to be a small person, maybe a child, standing by the back door. There were no children in that group. Sophie had already come and gone. Using photo enhancement software, the photo was examined several times. It was definitely there, but the image couldn't be improved very much. Just a small child standing in the corner where there shouldn't have been one. Oh, yes, and you can see the corner running right through the body. Christopher Juarez was at the Arechiga Hall October 12, 2018. During the investigation, Chris was asked to take a group on a tour. One other LPRS member tagged along, just so there would be extra help. This person just happened to also be a psychic. It was already after midnight, and it was the last tour of the night. They got up to the attic, and they worked their way downstairs, uh, trying to get the hottest part of the tour out of the way. Nothing was found in the attic, and they went to the second floor. As they were walking, Chris said his vision got blurry. It was as if a fog was forming in the hallway around him. He asked if any of the others could see anything using thermal vision or IR cameras, but nobody saw anything. The psychic said there were 2 spirits in the hallway, and they were close to Chris. He turned and headed back the way he'd come. The psychic said the spirits were now following him. She told him he had best go outside and clear himself. This was taken as being a good idea, and out he went. Nobody else in the group had seen or felt anything during the tour. Just him. Marta was a student at the Laredo Community College, which had been the Laredo Junior College, and then the Laredo College. Really? Do they have to keep changing the name? Marta was there back in 1990 when it was the Laredo Community College. To make ends meet, she took a job at the Arechiga Hall working on the second floor. This was where the social and behavioral department had their offices. The desk was right across the hall from the stairs leading to the attic. The attic was one big room with a table and a few chairs, but it was seldom used since it was hot up there year round. Hot as in over 100 degrees sometimes. There was no air conditioning up there. The staff would all hear what sounded like people moving around upstairs. There would be bumps and creaks, and the sound of a chair being dragged across the floor. Footsteps going from place to place. It sounded as if there might be more than one person up there. The staff would all hear these sounds, and they would all look up at the ceiling, wondering, what's going on up there? There was no way anybody could have gone past the desk without being seen, and yet somebody was up there. Eventually, one or two of the members would slowly make their way up the stairs and peek up over the top step. There was never anyone up there to be making all that noise, and as soon as they got up there, the sounds would stop. Back in 1998 or maybe 2000, there was a rather an interesting incident involving the softball team. The team was about to begin practice at sundown. They walked out onto the diamond and they began throwing the ball back and forth to get warmed up. One of the players turned facing the cemetery and he saw something hanging from a tree. Just outside the cemetery wall was a body. He yelled for his fellow ball players and they all began running towards the tree, thinking that somebody had just killed themselves or was trying to. The ball players all ran, hoping to help this person, as one of them pulled out his phone and tried to call 911 to get an ambulance en route. It's hard to dial while running. The ball players all arrived at the tree, but there was no body there. They turned in circles, trying to figure out how they might have run past the body in such a hurry to help. Several of them looked in the bushes, trying to see if maybe the body had fallen when nobody noticed. The guy with the cell phone stopped trying to call, realizing there was more confusion, but no bodies. The mad dash to help turned into a confused walk as the ball players looked around, trying to figure out what they might have mistaken for a body hanging from a tree. It's not that far from where they had been standing to where the body had been. As the realization set in, it was decided to keep this incident to themselves. Nobody wanted to say that they had seen something weird out there. There's a ghost that has been seen at the end of the street on several occasions. It's a female with long, long black hair and a dress that reaches almost to the ground. There's a slight gap between the dress, her feet, and the ground. This ghost has also been seen in the backyard of the president's house. She's always described as the same long hair, long dress, but she just drifts across the ground as if floating. They refer to her. Did I say she had a black dress? I'm sorry, she had a white dress. She's referred to as the Lady in White, and she's been seen all over the place, well, all over the college. All along the riverbank, there are what we call landings, where on occasion folks smuggling things or people into the country use in order to get up on the bank of the river. Just about every one of these landings has been given a name to distinguish it from all the other landings. If a large load of marijuana is caught at a particular location, it'll be called the Doper's Landing. If somebody does something stupid at one of these landings, like, oh, say, slips and falls into the river, then the landing will be named after them. I'm pretty much sure that I've never had a landing named for me, as far as I know. Just up north from the north wall from Fort McIntosh is a landing that the neighborhood folks use for fishing. So the agents refer to this as the Fisherman's Landing. On occasion, many agents have gone down to this landing only to find folks there trying to catch dinner. It's a nice shady spot with trees that jut out over the river, giving shade to anybody standing there. The Border Patrol agents working the area will sneak in to the landing late at night to have a look for any illegal activity. The idea is to get down to the landing as quietly without attracting any attention. If somebody's in the middle of the river carrying a big duffel bag full of something, you don't want them to know you're there. This has sent more than one agent, correction, while going down to the fisherman's landing, they have encountered the woman in white moving from one side of the landing to the other. Sometimes she's encountered on the trail leading down to the landing. You try to imagine that. You're sneaking down to a landing, trying to look for a load of dope, and you run into a ghost instead. This has sent more than one agent running back to their unit. Once safely away, they swear they're never going to tell anybody what just happened. Nobody wants to gain a reputation as seeing things. It's not until they have about 20 years in or they've retired that the stories start to come out. It's funny how many stories I've heard over the years from retired agents and police officers. Things that at the time that they happened, you'd swear nothing happened, and then you hear the rest of the story. The idea of a small child dying and the ghost lingering on long after their passing is one of the worst ideas when it comes to the paranormal. Kids aren't supposed to have unfinished business. For those folks that think all ghosts are here because of that, they're not supposed to have done anything to warrant their staying on in this plane of existence. Makes me wonder, are ghosts of children actually something else? Fort McIntosh, people have seen the little girl hanging around at several locations. The image they report is a girl, 7 to 8 years old. She's dressed in an old style outfit. She has shoes with buttons on the side. This would put her as living between 1870 and 1914. The police office, a police officer, was checking out a report of suspicious activity in the motor pool one night. This area is west from the guardhouse, behind the old bookstore. The officer spotted somebody walking around in the yard where the vehicles were stored. He could see it was a young girl who shouldn't have been wandering around that late at night. There is a neighborhood just a few hundred yards south from the yard, people living there, along with many small children, but maybe she had wandered away from home. The officer asked her what she was doing wandering around in an area off limits to unauthorized personnel. The girl just kept walking along as if she hadn't heard him. He was about to follow when she faded from view. 1 second, she was there, looking like a real, live human. She was gone so quick the officer thought she must have ducked down behind something. He walked over with his flashlight and he looked behind and under the vehicle. The yard wasn't that full. As he was looking, he realized there were no footprints in the dirt. Nobody wants to be considered as prone to hallucinations. Police officers avoid talking about anything that might cause people to think they're anything but rational, logical, unflappable folks who never see or do anything weird. During my research, I spoke with several campus police officers. They were all friendly, especially when they found out I was a retired agent. Several of the officers had stories to tell, with the caveat that I not use their names. I also spoke to a few officers that are no longer working for Laredo College. This doesn't mean they never have paranormal encounters, they just never talk about them. Not until after retiring, or they reach a point in their careers that they no longer care for other people's opinions. The same little girl has been seen walking along the walkway in front of the chapel. Late at night, people have seen a little girl dressed in old style clothing walking along as if she belonged there, solid, living, until they try to approach her and then she vanishes. She's been seen in front of the old hospital, which is on the other side of the campus. The Laredo police cruise through the college all the time. It gives extra security to the college, and it gives the officers something to look at night other than downtown Laredo. One night, a Laredo officer was driving slowly along the streets of the college. He was right in front of the old theater that was turned into the library for a few years while the new library was being built. As he's driving along, he saw what looked like a little girl standing on top of one of the trash cans. He drove up next to her, and when he stopped his cruiser, she jumped from the trash can onto the hood of his car. Now, this is not the kind of thing you should do if you want to remain in the police's good graces. He jumped out of his car. The girl was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished without a trace. He looked at the hood. There were no marks, no scratches, no dent from where she had landed. He described her as being 7 or 8 years old, dressed in old style clothing, like from the turn of the century. He didn't say what her footwear looked like. Not wanting to appear as if somebody that sees things, he didn't bother to mention this to anybody until I got to talk to him. Other police officers have also told me and told each other about encountering this same small child ghost or entity or thing. Like I said, we don't know for sure that a child ghost would actually hang around. One night, while driving by the old hospital, the police heard what sounded like dogs barking from inside the building. They walked around the outside, looking at all the windows and checking the doors to see how dogs could have gotten inside. There was no opening. How could a pack of dogs have gained entry? They got the key to the front door and unlocked it and slowly pushed the door open, not wanting the dogs to attack or anything. As soon as the door swung open, the barking stopped. The ground floor was empty, and so they went upstairs. They checked the second floor, and there were no dogs up there. They checked the basement, and there were no dogs in the basement. All the doors and the windows were secured. There wasn't even any dog hair on the floor. The police officers had nothing to say about why they'd heard dog barking when there were no dogs around. Oh, the hospital just happens to be like a block from the cemetery. There used to be reports, mentioned often way back, of a old boarding house that was near Fort McIntosh, near as in like 2 blocks away. Uh, the boarding house was a part of the I&GN Railroad station. The International Great Northern Railroad, or the I&GN, operated solely in Texas. It was created in 1873. The International Railroad and the Houston and Great Northern Railroads all merged, and they all became part of the Texas Mexican Railroad. People would report seeing a man dressed in a soldier's uniform sitting on a barrel. He would be holding a bottle of beer in one hand, and he looked as if he were asleep or passed out. When anybody would try to wake him, the soldier would fade into nothing. This soldier was seen by several different people on different occasions, and every one of them described the exact same look. The railroad station is no longer there, and neither is this old boarding house, all torn down in the name of progress. I hate it when that happens. If it's a cool old building, they shouldn't tear it down just to put up some ugly modern monstrosity. Now, if it's a nasty, horrible piece of work, oh, say like the St. Anthony Hotel, well, then, yeah, that thing needs to be burned. If you've never been there, it's it's quite a place. Flophouse is not it's an insult to the word flophouse to call it that. Uh, at one time, some entrepreneurs had actually opened a coffee shop in the first floor of the St. Anthony, and the coffee was good, but the accommodations were horrible. Well, that's it for Fort McIntosh and the paranormal. I hope I've made your Halloween interesting. Unfortunately, it's coming to a close, but I'll still try to do another show about Halloween focused subject next time since I forgot to do it the first week of the month. That's no guarantee. I don't know what I'm doing from day to day, let alone week to week. If you enjoyed tonight's show, tell other people they should be listening as well. If you didn't enjoy the show, why are you still listening to me? Until next week, until next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where there's strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.